Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, July 14th, and we got a lot of media days to talk about. We have a ton of things from the Big 12 media days that went on this past week, and then we got to talk about the SEC media days that got underway today, about 10 minutes from me, actually, at the College Football Hall of Fame in downtown Atlanta. A ton of different things coming out of that, even in the first day. We'll talk about some little things. We'll get into a more in-depth breakdown of the SEC media days on Friday, but we'll break down a couple of those things towards the later end of the show. On the second part of the show, I definitely want to get into the biggest concerns I have for at least my top 10, and I'll probably break out a new top 10 here, maybe the start of August, somewhere around there, to kind of update that as we head into the season. But as of right now, I'll use my post-spring top 10, and we'll get into my biggest concerns for those teams that at the end of the day want to be vying for a national championship, and then we'll do kind of the wrap-up. We'll talk about SEC media days, maybe add in a couple of little things, a little bit of Nick Saban talk that we'll get into more depth on Friday, but definitely some things coming out of Greg McElroy's mouth that has a lot of people at least interested to see what happens over the next little bit. We'll talk about some recruiting updates. UGA continues to be the most dominating force on the trail right now, and we'll talk about a couple other things at the end of the show there. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, because Big 12 Media Days was last week in Dallas, Texas, obviously in Jerry World, where they will have their conference championship here pretty shortly, or at the end of the year. But it was a very, very busy week. There's no doubt about that. Not necessarily these massive, massive storylines coming out of it. No one said anything crazy. No one said anything out of pocket, as they say, but there were definitely some storylines that I want to get into, and I think the biggest one, in my opinion at the very least, was Brett Yormark. Brett Yormark's confidence in this conference is very, very clear. It is very obvious that this guy feels very, very bullish about the future of this conference going forward, and he doubled down on that when he was talking at the media days this past week. He said, "I am fully in favor of a 5+11 format because in reality, it's probably not going to help us for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years. I believe we're going to be a good enough conference where maybe 5 years and beyond, we can kind of compete for way more of those at-large spots that as of right now don't seem like they're going to go to us. They very well could down the road." And that's something that he kind of reiterated. I don't know if this is something that I fully believe, if I'm being totally honest. I think the gap in terms of money, in terms of media deals, in terms of prestige in the SEC and the Big Ten is going to be really hard to run down. Just in general, the Big 12 has a lot of ground to make up. That being said, I think Brett Yormark's doing an incredible job. I think he's opening so many different doors for the Big 12. He's bringing in money that I think a lot of us didn't even see being brought into college football, and we'll get into that here in a second, but a lot of different great things that this guy has done, and he thinks that his conference is going to follow. He thinks they are going to be able to be at the very top of the world and possibly be in the conversations with the SEC and the Big Ten going forward. And that's something that I fully respect the confidence. I don't necessarily fully agree with him. I do think the Big 12 probably should take the auto bid format, but at the end of the day, I fully understand where he's coming from and really respect the confidence that he has in his conference. So it'll be really interesting to see that unfold. He did say that they would get multiple teams into the field this year. Very much possible. There's no doubt about that. But I think unlike last year, you're going to have to see a couple of teams separate, whether that's Arizona State and Texas Tech, or that's Iowa State, Kansas State, or any Utah and Oklahoma State. Who knows? Who knows who separates from that conference? But we saw last year, if the Big 12 gets into a big knot up at the top, especially up at the top, it's going to be really hard for that second team to get in. Even going into that game, I think everyone understood that whoever lost that game was not going to be in the dance. And I think that could be a reality going into this year if they have kind of the crazy year that they had last year. And frankly, I expect that, and maybe even a little bit more from the Big 12 this year. So Brett Yormark has the utmost confidence in his conference. He probably should. He's done a really, really incredible job with them since taking over. Obviously, kind of expedited Texas and Oklahoma leaving because it probably gave them a better chance to land on their feet afterwards, and they've definitely done that. So we'll see what happens with this playoff talk. Obviously something to keep your eye out on, but Brett Yormark is very, very confidently standing on the 5+11 format. He'll get some pushback from the Big Ten, but seems like enough people are on his side to get that moving forward, and then we'll see what happens a couple of years from now. Maybe the Big 12 is on the same level of the SEC and the Big Ten and are competing right there for national titles as well. But the biggest story that came out of this, in my opinion at the very least, was Scott Frost. He took a little bit of a shot at Nebraska, actually not that little of a shot, a shotgun to the chest, frankly, to Nebraska and its fan base. He was being asked about taking that job, about what advice he would give to himself or to other coaches that are kind of looking to make their way up in the industry. And he said very plainly, don't take the wrong job. And obviously that made a lot of Husker fans not too happy. Let's just be totally honest. That was a little bit of a shot at them. He actually went on to say, I said I wouldn't leave UCF unless it was a place I could win a national championship. So, he said, I got tugged in a direction to try to help my alma mater, and I didn't really want to do it. It wasn't a good move. I'm lucky to be back at a place where I can be happier. He also got into a little bit of details about how when he's walking around Orlando, he can kind of go unnoticed. Not everyone's turning around saying, hey, there's the head football coach of UCF. In Lincoln, they're doing that. There's no doubt about that. And they definitely have a lot of eyes on you, a lot of expectations on you, and that can be really tough. There's no doubt about that. And I want to be very clear. What head coaches and their families and all of that stuff, what they go through around college campuses can be terrible. There's a lot of people looking at you. You're always on display. When you lose a game on Saturday, you might be a little bit more hesitant to go out and get brunch on Sunday. That's just kind of the way college football works. Here's my thing. If you're a head coach that really wants to win national championships, that really wants to be a competitive person in this sport and wants to compete at the highest level, this is a uniquely terrible take. It is a take that will keep you from winning national titles because I'm sorry, UCF is great, and maybe by some miracle you can find a way to make that a national championship program. I don't think you can, but whatever program you move on to, whatever program is prepared to win a national title, you get that. Regardless of where you are. Even in Austin, Texas, I bet Steve Sarkisian would tell you he gets a lot of looks. He gets a lot of people stopping him. Now, lately, it's been a lot of people stopping him to thank him for bringing Texas back to where they're supposed to be, but that can change in a hurry, and he's fully aware of that. In Athens, Georgia, you best believe Kirby Smart can't go anywhere without being just hounded by people, good or bad. So this is part of college football. If you want to be an elite head coach in the sport, the outside stuff is going to be a part of it, and if you can't handle it, you're not going to be a national championship head coach. So Scott Frost, I have a ton of respect for him. I think he's going to do a good job at UCF. Now, it's gotten a whole lot harder to win around Orlando than it was the first time he was there. When they were in the AAC, they had a leg up in finances and talent of everyone else in that conference. That's not the case in the Big 12. And frankly, even if he does well at UCF, where are you going to where you can both win a national championship and walk through the streets without getting noticed? Because as far as I know, those places don't exist in college football. So I thought that was a crazy quote. I thought it was a quote that beyond what, attacking other people and pushing the blame on other people for what happened at Nebraska, which he had plenty of a hand in. Not everything was his fault, obviously, but he had plenty of a hand in the failures at Nebraska. At Nebraska, he had plenty of a hand in the failures there. The reality is, when you get back to the elite level, the place where you can win a national championship, you're going to have that. So if you don't want to deal with that, then maybe you should just set up shop in Orlando, and if that doesn't work out there, then go be in media. Go do something else, because the reality is, if you want to win a national championship and not get noticed when you go out on the street, those two things don't go together in college football. Whether you like that or not, that's up to you, but the reality is, this did not make me very happy about Scott Frost. I'll be totally honest. I don't necessarily love the comments. I frankly think it means he's not all that serious about winning a national title. But we'll see what happens with Scott Frost. Obviously very excited to see what happens down in Orlando, but this was not a great start at the very least. Deion Sanders was at the media days, and first of all, great to see him there. Obviously had some health issues early on in the offseason, was away from the team for some time during spring. He's found his way back and seems fully locked in. Both quarterbacks were there with him, Juju Lewis as well as Caden Salter, so he kind of left the people guessing, and I think he doesn't know who's going to start for him, so he brought both those guys. It was very interesting to hear from both those guys about how all that's going. I still think it's going to be Caden Salter, but we'll see what happens down the road. The big thing from this was he called for a salary cap in college football, talked about how the crazy money being thrown around. We talked about Texas Tech and Felix Ojo last week. Sounds like those numbers were a lot less than people were reporting initially, but the reality is a lot of money is being thrown around. We know that a lot of teams are going over that salary cap, quote unquote, that was put in place by the House settlement. because they can. At least they could up until July 1st. I think this thing is going to get a little bit weird. I think the reality is a lot of us thought when the House settlement was passed, that was essentially a salary cap. Whether it was 15 million or 16 million or whatever you decided in your athletic department, you had a certain amount of money to spend. And obviously this year, as you're kind of doing the in-between, it makes things a little bit more complicated. You didn't have the rules until July 1st. You paid a lot of guys before July 1st. I can promise you that. So there's going to be really expensive rosters this year, and I think this is something that very much has to happen. There's no doubt about that. I just thought it just happened. Frankly, I thought the House settlement was the thing that put in a salary cap for college football. Doesn't seem like Dion thinks that, and frankly, I think a lot of coaches feel the same way Dion does, so we'll see what happens there. That's something we can talk about at the end of the show. We'll talk about the SCORE Act, something that has been brought up lately that hopefully would bring this to a more crystallized space, a more crystalline structure, but at the end of the day, this is something we very much need. I think everyone agrees that the amount of money being thrown around is absolutely crazy. Even if you have a salary cap and then you have your quote-unquote bag men that have been there in the past, I think it's much better than where we are right now. So I do think everyone agrees with this. Frankly, I thought the House settlement was supposed to do that, and maybe it will in time, but as of right now, it seems like a lot of coaches are kind of singing the same tune that Dion is singing, and not necessarily the greatest one for college football, at least as of right this second. Cody Campbell is someone I want to talk about. I talk about Cody Campbell before I talk about Joey McGuire, which sounds a little bit odd, but Cody Campbell made some waves at Big 12 Media Days. That's not him there, but at the end of the day, he was all around Dallas. He was talking to just about everyone that was willing to listen, and it's going to be really interesting to watch this guy go to work over the next little bit. He is not shy at all about the money that he's spending to get Texas Tech back into the game. He fully understands that that's part of the game. You know, Texas Tech is not on the level of a Texas or a Texas A&M or an Oregon or a Georgia or a Bama when it comes to funds year over year. They could be with this guy in the picture. That's for sure. They also got a big-time kind of a little bit of smoke, at the very least, around one of the top players in the 2027 class, LaDainian Guyton, incredibly talented defensive lineman. A couple people started taking shots at Cody Campbell for for showing a little bit of love to LaDainian Guyton, and he said, I'm not going anywhere. A lot of people were making the joke that you got to do this about 3 or 4 more times before Texas Tech is really going to be in that national championship conversation, and I tend to agree with that overall, but I do think it's going to be really interesting to watch. This guy is boisterous at the very least. He is very, very outspoken, and I think it's going to be really, really cool to watch, and there's no doubt about it. And I've said time and again that Texas Tech needs to do this. You know, if you're going to play big boy football, if you're going to compete for national titles the way that they want to, you need a lot more money pumping into that place, and they're trying to pull that off. The reality is, all I'm going to say is maybe don't be this in the public eye. Maybe don't be the guy that the NCAA or the College Sports Commission or NIL Go or Brett Seeley, all of the different people that have just been introduced to this landscape from the House settlement, just kind of don't put yourself on their minds, because I think they're looking for a win at some point. I don't know if they would get it here. I don't know if they'll ever get a win, if I'm being totally honest. That's something we can talk about a little bit later. I tend to believe the government's going to have to get involved, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't be the guy that's all over Twitter talking a little bit of trash to some opposing fan bases. I would be a little bit more quiet. Now, Cody Campbell knows what he's doing. I'm not necessarily super worried about the guy, but just to say, I don't think anyone wants to be in the crosshairs of a organization that very badly needs a win right about now, and Cody Campbell might just be stoking those fires just a little bit too much. But it'll be interesting to watch that unfold. Some other little news that came out. Joey McGuire said he wants a home-and-home with LSU. Please, that would be incredible. Would absolutely want that to unfold, and the SEC is going to have some big-time conversations about what their schedule looks like coming forward. Maybe that's included. Who knows? Maybe Brian Kelly, he was on the stage earlier. I don't think he commented on this, but maybe we can get something out of him by the end of the week about this possibly happening. WWE deal was signed by the Big 12 by Brett Yormark, and it's going to go on. It sounds like the Friday before some of these big time games in the Big 12 this year. They're going to have a SmackDown, and frankly, that's going to be awesome. There's no doubt about that. You're going to have a lot of really, really passionate, really, really intense young people that really want to see some WWE. So I thought that was a really cool thing. Another great, innovative way to bring in some money to the conference. And then finally, Jake Retzlaff, someone that we've talked about quite a bit on here. He is officially out of BYU, and he didn't go into the transfer portal. He actually just unenrolled from BYU and is kind of a free agent of sorts. As of right now, BYU did not authorize him to go into the portal, so he had to just, leave school, and he's going to look around. We'll see what happens there. I think Tulane is possibly an option with some of the quarterback troubles they've had. I think some depth options for maybe a Tennessee or a Georgia is on the table, but overall, I think it's going to take him a little bit of time to get this all underway. And even if he's on a team this upcoming year, I can't imagine he's going to be able to get on the field with only about 3 weeks to learn an offense and get on the field for them. Maybe Tulane, just because of how dire that situation is, but as of right now, I wouldn't necessarily bet on us seeing Jake Retzlaff play football this year. But overall, the Big 12 media days weren't explosive by any means. I think there were a lot of kind of interesting things. A lot of people ran with that Scott Frost quote, and I didn't love it either. I'll be totally honest with you. Definitely makes me a little bit more worried about his time in UCF, and definitely, if he gets a big-time job again, a lot of people are going to question it a little bit more than they would have about a week ago. So there are definitely some things to watch there. The Big 12 media days gave way to the SEC media days today, and we'll talk about that kind of at the end of the show. But let's take one break here. When we come back, let's talk about the biggest concerns I have for my top 10. We'll do my post-spring top 10. Probably will be updating this pretty shortly, but let's just get into the biggest concerns I have for some of the biggest national title contenders right after this.